You're going to start out by making a slip knot and attaching it to the corner in the lower left side of the loom. Next, you're going to bring the thread up between the second peg from the left and bring it around the two clear at the top and between the two clear at the bottom. So you're going to go up and bring it around two, between the two, around two, between the two, around two, between the two. This is why it's important to actually have distinct colors, because you want to be able to see the pattern. And this pattern is going to continue throughout the weaving. So I cut the piece off so I could attach a contrasting or a different color so that at the last step you'll be able to see what I'm doing a little bit better. I attach it with a square knot. Now we're going to turn the loom and we're going to start doing it again. We're going to go around, between, around the two at the top, between the two at the bottom, around the two at the top, between the two at the bottom, around, between, around, between, around, between. And we're going to turn the loom again. And again, we're going to go, you can't see the top, but it's around, between, around the two at the top, between, around, between the two clear at the bottom, around the two clear at the top, between the two clear at the bottom, around the two clear at the top, between the two clear at the bottom, around, between. Now this is our third layer. At this point, we're going to measure the amount of yarn we're going to need to go to do our last layer, which is going to join it all together. We're going to go around the loom between 3.5 to 4 times. The amount of times that you go around the loom will determine how long the final piece of string that you can use to sew the squares together are, if you're going to be sewing them together. And since we're going to be, these squares are going to be made into a scarf, I left the thread pretty long. And so now we're going to thread a plastic, large plastic needle. And this time, instead of going between the black and the two sets of clear, we're going to go between the corner and the first black peg. And we're just going to weave. We're going to weave under, over, under, over, under, over. Throughout this last row, we're always going to go under that solid, the tan piece or the bottom layer and over the top layer. So under the bottom layer, over the top layer. And as we do this, this is going to lock in all the different layers. So with this style weaving, you're actually weaving a half of the weft, which is threads that run back and forth. I'm trying to show you, but you can't see it, that you're actually continuing the pattern. So you're going around those two clear ones, which are at my right now, and I'm going to end up between the two clear ones on the opposite side. You see? Between. And now I'm going to pull the thread through, and I'm going to turn the loom and scrunch, scrunch, scrunch. And now I'm going to go between, following the pattern, and I'm going under that first layer. And you're always going to go over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under. When you get to the last piece that is wrapped around the pegs, just keep following the pattern. So if you just went over, go under, however you go. You're always going to be picking up the bottom layer. And like I said, I did it in a distinct color, so you notice that that's the layer that's being picked up and put onto the needle. As you weave, you're going to need to advance or give yourself a little bit more thread to pull through, so you're not pulling 2 layers through, you're only pulling a single layer through. And we're just going to keep going back and forth. You're just turning your loom and then weaving in the other direction. And the nice thing about this style of weaving is that The cloth that you make is much lighter than the cloth that you would make if you were crocheting or knitting with the same type of yarn, and you really use less yarn. You use less yarn to get more fabric in general when you weave, depending on how you're weaving. Some looms have more waste than others. This loom has very little waste. The only waste comes in any yarn that that is too long if you make your tail too long. But aside from that, you're pretty much weaving everything. And this is pretty much in real time. So within 5 minutes, you're pretty much the way through. The warping part, or the wrapping of the 3 layers, doesn't take much time at all. I'm actually trying to move slowly just to make it a little bit easier for you to see what I'm doing. But once you have the loom warped up, it's just going back and forth, catching that bottom layer and the top layer, and you're creating kind of like a sandwich of the middle layers, which is making your fabric. Now you may notice on the left and right side of the loom that the threads to the sides are kind of drawing in a little bit. We're going to fix that. You're going to see that in a minute. I'm going to fix that when I get done. We want to have everything spaced well, and we want to do this while we have the fabric still on the loom. And so pretty much it's really straightforward what you're doing. You're just going back and forth, catching the yarn as you weave. And you're always going to be going around 2, skip 1, around 2, skip 1, around 2, skip 1. And that's how we warp it, and that's how we weave it. As you get closer to the top, it can become a little bit difficult to weave if you have made your tension too tight. When you're warping the loom, you want to have, tension enough so it doesn't come off the peg because it's so loose, but not so much tension that when you finally get to this step of weaving, that it's too tight to be able to, weave these last rows. This is the final row, and we're going to go between the first and the last peg to catch these last set of threads so that your weaving does not come undone. And you may need to take your time. You may only be able to do a couple at a time, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so now that all of it is woven, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my slip knot, take it out, and I'm going to weave in that end. Now you do not want to weave it in following the same color thread, or else you're going to just take it out. You're going to follow the thread beside it, which in this case is the solid cream thread, and you're just going to work your needle in, put the thread through, and pull it through. You can trim your end when you take it off the loom. Now you're just going to even out all the spacing, those areas that were kind of pulled in as you were weaving. And we're just going to go do this on either side of the loom. Okay. And once we have everything spaced out relatively neatly, it's time to take it off. I'm using a tool that you may see with Loom knitting, and the reason why you kind of need a tool to take it off is, and this is also the reason why we use push pins, is when working with the thicker yarn, you kind of don't want it popping off, and the push pins are relatively shorter than normal relative to the yarn, shorter than normal pin looms are. The reason that the yarn stays on the push pins is that the push pins have a little cap at the top, and that keeps the yarn from just slipping off, which is great, which is why you don't want to replace the push pins with nails, unless they have a head or something at the top. But that the push pins, they just have the right dimensions just to make everything work with the yarn, with this thick yarn, which is in this case super bulky yarn that we're weaving with. And that's it. The tool just makes it come out a whole lot easier. And there you have it, a finished Pinloom woven square.